All right, let's do it. So first question, you have a multifaceted career. It's taken you from investment banking to heading fintech teams to teaching MBA courses to becoming an international best-selling author. So could you take us through the journey that led to these roles, and especially your decision to move to Shanghai, and how your experience with China's tech revolution has shaped your views and contributions to the field of fintech?
Sure, that's a big one. Let's start with the easy one, and let's put this in context. Everybody right now is reading about how artificial intelligence is going to disrupt their world, right? It's going to shake your tree, no matter who you are and no matter where you are. And let me be a model citizen for having many careers. And I think that's the thing that we have to look at as jokes aside. We all have to look at this concept that our careers aren't going to be a linear path anymore, and they're going to have multiple iterations of you, whoever you want to be. And I'm a really great example, and I'll be very blunt. My career changes are all based on adversity, in the sense that in 2008, when the global financial crisis hit and my life as a banker ended with many others, we were all faced with a choice. You either repurpose yourself and find something new, or what? You become a dinosaur. And so for me, my way of finding something new was to go to China. I literally arrived with 2 duffel bags, plopped them down and said, okay, I live in China now. It's the world's greatest economy. It was booming in 2010 in Shanghai. And I had a new life. And I got a new life as an MBA school professor, and eventually wound up for another 5 years of career at IBM, doing computers and math all put together, which is what I essentially did when I was in finance. But the point is, there's at least 3 careers there. The investment banking career that lasted just shy of around 18 years, right? And then there was a career as a professor for a couple of years, and then there was about 5 at IBM. And now I'm on to career, what is it, number 4, which is basically writing books. So, and to a certain degree, my career as an author started out of adversity as well, because, I was working happily at IBM until they decided to let half of their staff go across the planet. It wasn't just me. There were massive layoffs. And okay, you say, all right, for me, it's now, I'll say this to others, at 57 at the time, now I'm older. I won't say how much, but anyway, you have to sort of find what is possible. So for me at 57, I wasn't going to get another corporate gig. And I'm sorry if that's harsh to people, but that's just the reality. And I felt I had a lot more to give. And the way I determined that I was going to give was through books and through social media. And that's why I write on LinkedIn every day. And I have 2 books out. I'm struggling with the 3rd because I'm not exactly sure what I'm inspired to write. But my point is this: we will all listeners out there who are hopefully younger than me, and those who are my age bracket, we are going to have multiple careers, and you have to expect that. Not be surprised when, oh my God, something happens, I can't do that job anymore. That's who I define myself as being. I am lost. Don't be that person, whoever I'm talking to.
Yeah. No, so that actually, I was wondering, how did you nobody, I think, gets up and decides to become a social media influencer, but, you obviously are. And how did that road kind of happen for you?
Yeah. Nobody wakes up and calls their mother and says, "Hi, Mom, I'm going to be a social influencer today. Aren't you proud of me?" Right? It's really funny. For me, look, it's different for everybody. And for me, it kept me relevant and in the business. Okay. So I will make no qualms about it. I wasn't thrilled when I was let go from IBM. And I think there's a lot of other people out there, insert company name X, in the sentence and you say, I'm not thrilled that I was let go from, how about Twitter? All right. Would you just let go a lot of other people, or Meta or Google or whatever, whatever company or bank you were working for? Nobody's thrilled about that. So for me, social media ended up being a way that I could reconnect with a long history of past coworkers. And then it was meeting all these new people, and it was a way of sharing. For me, it started as like, I'm by the water cooler in my old company, which one it was, and I'm talking to people. And that's essentially what I used social media for, to talk to people and get ideas out. So it served an important role for me, which was getting a message out. But then, and I'll admit to this, look, I'm a computer geek. I have always been one. So once I started doing it, I'm like, well, this is an algorithm. We have to game the algorithm. Oh, if I do this kind of content, I'll get more hits. If I do this length of writing, I'll get more people. Or, so if I'm going to do it, I want to be good at it. So, the one thing so when I started it, I said, well, if I'm going to do this, what are the conditions? What do I have to fulfill to be good at it? And it snowballed from there to where I am today. And I write every day on LinkedIn, and I have a newsletter, which I'll plug shamelessly. Yeah, you want to be good at whatever it is you're doing. And that's how I ended up being an honest to God influencer.
Yeah.
For what it's worth.
Yeah. Well, I mean, speaking of being good at what you're doing, let's talk about your books. You have personally witnessed China going cashless firsthand. How has this changed everyday life in China? And then what inspired you to write a book about it?
Yeah, those are fine questions. Okay, so what's it like being cashless in China? So what was the transition? The transition when I got here was 2010, and it's a story that I tell all the time, but it's 100% real, and it's 100% happened to me, which is where when I went to pay security deposits for an apartment, which required a couple of months of payment plus your first month of rent, whatever, right? You're looking at thousands of US dollars equivalent. And the biggest bill that China has is around 17 or 18. It's below a $20 bill, right? So what happens is when you go get that cash, you get literally bricks of money, large bricks. So I can still remember going to pay my security deposits and going out with these bricks in a backpack, and say, here you go, here's the bricks of money. So we went from that to a place where everything is automatic, digital. And it's a big transition, and that's nice. And I'll say to anybody out there that hasn't had the opportunity to go cashless, it's fundamentally pleasant. You just don't have to carry wads of change around, and it's just convenient. That part is true. But I'll take the next step for anybody out there to say that if you think that you're cashless with Apple Pay and Google Pay, for example, and Apple Pay, which are fine systems, you're not. And you really have a long way to go to match the super app experience and the integration of payment systems into every part of your life. And that's what I talk about in Cashless a lot. And it's a big theme. So going cashless is fundamentally a nice experience. Now, one caveat. People in China still have access to cash. I still have, here, let me show you one. I still have, my paper money floating around. And the thing is, what people are afraid of, I think, is a non-starter. And the people are afraid of government saying, we are outlawing cash. There will be no cash. And no one, including me, a guy who writes a book called Cashless, is promoting the elimination of cash. even the Chinese government, who, depending on where you sit or how you view the Chinese government, can be viewed as strict, is actually promoting the removal of cash from society because it still serves a purpose and will serve a purpose for many years in the future. So going cashless doesn't mean the elimination of cash. Okay. I think that's an important place to stop and hand it back to you.
Yeah, well, I was actually wondering about how, obviously lower income people and people who don't have access to digital devices, like how can they interact with the cashless sort of world going forward?
That's exactly. All right, that's a wonderful question because you get into the larger topic of financial inclusion. And ready, I've got a visual aid for this too, and that's where China's digital yuan is going, and that's what the book is about, right? And there is a clear recognition in China that going cashless through Alipay and WeChat Pay, ready? These guys. So that going cashless through Alipay and WeChat Pay was great, but it had a fundamental problem, and that was people who were older, people who don't have cell phones, people who are remote or rural who didn't have signal weren't included in the revolution. And that's why one of the biggest breakthroughs with the digital yuan, or China's central bank digital currency, right, is the development of little card systems where the card actually has a little LCD display and it works both without a signal and it works for elderly people who don't have access to a smartphone and only have a limited amount of digital know-how. So the trick in going cashless, which is the trick that's being pursued by governments all over the world right now who are investigating CBDC, is how to make digital payment as cash-like as possible, but not too cash-like. And we'll get to that in a second. And the way they're doing that is to basically try to make offline transfers and to make CBDC work with a very simple low-tech digital card or digital device, and so that anybody can use it. And that's what's key. One last statement now. The thing I said was to make it as cash-like as possible within limits, because we know that we can take $50,000, put it in a suitcase and pass it to you on the black market and nobody knows. And that's, some people say that's great. And other people say, no, that's breaking the law. You're doing black market payments. That's bad. Government clearly in its own means of payment isn't going to allow that cash equivalency with you passing $50,000 or $100,000 in suitcases around, or right. So that's that's the limitations that we can expect with CBDC going forward.
So, how do you view the potential role of CBDCs in terms of shaping monetary policy globally?
That's a really wonderful question. And if you looked at the early research on CBDC, central banks said, hey, we can potentially use CBDC to implement monetary policy, meaning the raising and lowering of interest rates. And what they found subsequently is that that was sort of an academic argument. In reality, you can't really use CBDC to implement monetary policy interest rate changes. And the reason is simple. People will not hold CBDC physically in their hands. They're not going to convert all of their savings to CBDC. What we see with the model of a two-tier CBDC issuance, which is the standard today, is that you're going to have a bank account. It's not going away. And then you're going to convert some of that money to CBDC and spend it digitally as you want. But the reality is most of your money is going to be in the bank. So the concept of monetary policy or implementing central banks implementing monetary policy through CBDC doesn't make any real sense. And this goes for the fear mongers. And the fear mongers are clear. They're saying, hey, the government is going to implement negative interest rates on you, and that's going to decrease your holdings and then, decrease the amount of money you have. And the reality is the government, first of all, has no interest in doing that. But even if they did, people would just swap their money back, go put it back in the bank, and there'd be no loss. I mean, so it's really an unrealistic expectation to have negative interest rates on CBDCs that cause people to lose money, because you'll just put it in the bank, and the bank will say, okay, we already lived through zero interest rates. We'll give you zero or very low. Right? But the concept of negative interest rates on a CBDC is really just not practical.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to ask you I have a lot of questions about China. You have observed China's technological revolution, almost from day one. What do you feel are the cultural factors that have enabled China to develop so rapidly?
Sure. I haven't been here from day one. I've been here from 2010. And so predating my arrival in China was the realization that cell phones are critical technology for society. And what the Chinese government did going back to 2008 or 7, I can't remember the exact year, was enact a policy that strove to connect all of rural China with cell phone towers and data. So it's a big place. China's a really big country and has a lot of rural areas. To this day, my wife and I enjoy going hiking in the mountains. Certainly, there are places where there's no signal, obviously, but the government really realized early on what a disruptive technology digital was and promoted it expansion into the most rural or very rural China. And then having connected everybody through mobile networks, they realized that digital services were essentially the only way that they could expect to reach out and touch 1.4 billion people, and perhaps better than say reach out and touch, reach out and provide service for such a massive population. So it offered China a tremendous opportunity to say, hey, we've got 1.4 billion people. We can't reach them all, but we can do better. And digital is the tool we will use to do better. And that's, now that was a very forward game plan in 2007 and 8. And, you really see that throughout the developing world now, in Pakistan, in India, where digital is considered, the backbone of government effort to actually get people banked, get people somehow active in government, or at least active in their society. Better to say society. And so it was on the avant-garde in China, and it's now part of the playbook all throughout developing nations in the planet.
Yeah, no, it's and telecom penetration is a big part of that. Even here in Pakistan as well. Is in terms of digital transformation, which is, what do you think are the biggest hurdles in digital transformation, and especially, in terms of fintechs?
Yeah, So that goes back to my first book, Innovation Lab Excellence. And, it's really the big, and it depends on the scale. So let's use different scales for this. At a corporate level, you can look at digital transformation, whether it's in a bank or whether it's in any company, is that there is institutional difficulty or institutional resistance to transforming digitally. And that usually means that it comes down to managers or employees for fearing job loss, fearing loss of power, loss of employment, loss of money, whatever. But basically, it's a fear factor. So at the level of a company, you can look at digital transformations as being problematic from fear. You can also look at them as being problematic. And this is what I dealt with at IBM from tech stack. You say, well, look, I've got old technology. You want new technology. That's by this day, that was a valid problem in 2016, 15, whatever. But now we're far enough along that is increasingly, it exists, but it's decreasing as an issue. So that's, those are corporate level, company level issues. Now let's look at it at a higher level. Let's look at it at the level of a state or a government. And there it gets sort of more interesting. What's preventing nations from digitally transforming? Well, go to the developing world, and what you see is the inability to provide digital services to people. People are simply not connected. Okay, so you've got one issue is the connectivity of people. So all of this, Alipay, WeChat Pay, all of these nice payment systems, they basically need signal. And if you don't, they need two things: signal and a smartphone. Okay, and that's where central bank digital currency tries to come in and say, hey, I've got a way to pay without signal and without a smartphone. But fundamentally, for most developing economies, what you're looking at is the inability to provide digital connectivity to a large percentage of the population. And you should look to sub-Saharan Africa for the ultimate manifestation of this, where you've got large percentages of the population who just simply have no access to digital because it doesn't exist, and or those that exist in areas or larger cities where it does exist still have difficulty in purchasing a smartphone, which now with advances they're getting down to around the $5 to $6 US range, which is helping a lot. But still, it's this divide, this digital divide, because governments can't. Now, the other issue is internal to the government. And we talked about this with China. China was early in recognizing the role of digital and, of course, paid for it. They pushed their state telephone companies to go out and give digital signal to remote areas. Are other governments capable of making that same leap and saying, this is so important that we'll pay for it, or we'll find a way to pay for it, or we'll figure out how to do it? And that is beyond me. But digital transformation has to be seen at both large scale, macro scale, and government sense, and then, of course, in corporate sense. And then, of course, you're going to make the joke and say we have personal digital transformation, but I'll leave that one out for me for now.
Yeah, no, well, personal digital transformation is I feel the last step, right? I introduced my mother to ChatGPT the other day, and the look on her face was priceless. So there's a line in your bio that
that's excuse me, that is a wonderful moment, and I love it because it's a really great example of when people are shown that this new technology, it is astounding to them.
Yeah.
All right. And that goes back a little bit to the question you asked earlier about why China? And this is the question that I get a lot. Why Asia? Why China? And it's exactly that. People are astounded by what they see and view it as a digital accessory that can make their life better. It is aspirational toward a better life.
Yep.
And that moment when you're in rural China, and this, I swear to God, this happened to me. Like an 80-some-old-year-old lady had her first phone and had QR code and wanted to sell me some flowers, and her niece, daughter, or younger person was in the background checking to see that she could use it, and I swiped and paid, and the 5 RMB went into her account, and her face lit up, and she looks back to her daughter or guardian who's looking out after her, and she's like, wow, I got money. Once people see that, it creates a fire that's just, you can't put it out. So, so people in the West ask, why Asia? Why are they so ready to go for this digital leap? And people in China and Asia are welcoming because technology is aspirational. And to the West, where we exist in technology, it is now something to be afraid of. So you can't compare the way these societies look at technology. Sorry, I digress.
No, that's absolutely true. And I think there's an element of humans are inherently sort of practical. And so when they see something new, the first thought is, how can I use that? How can I leverage that? And I think that's, one of my mother's first things was, I'm going to use this for X, Y, and Z. And, so there is a line in your bio that I found really memorable, which was, you call yourself a tireless evangelist for using technology to democratize access to financial markets. And so I feel like that's very relevant to what we're talking about. And how, just say a little bit more about that. Why do you think that's so important, and how do we get there?
Yeah. The reason that I am this, quote, tireless advocate is because I lived through this transition in China. And ironically, look, I live in Shanghai. It's a big modern city. People always think that all of China is like Shanghai. My hobby is hiking. We go hiking in very remote rural regions of China. There's nothing there. And but what I saw over time going hiking is that these villages that once were not connected became connected. They became part of the economic system, and they got that way through digital payments. It helped them immeasurably to live better lives. As far as I can tell, there are native Chinese who have much more profound and deeper. They have mothers and fathers and grandparents. They can tell that story far better than me, and they do, and they have. So I take that experience with me, and I say this is fundamentally good for people. Yes, I understand that there's issues of fraud. I understand that there's digital ID issues that we have to tackle. But fundamentally, digital access to money is fundamentally good for people. And the people that it helps the most are the poor, because wealthy people already have this access. So whether it's you have Apple Pay, meaning you have enough money to have an iPhone, right? Because they cost more. So if you have access to Apple Pay, if you have your Western credit cards, you take this for granted because it exists as part of your life. But most of developing markets and most of developing Asia doesn't have all this. So for them, this transition to digital is a breakthrough, and it is aspirational, and it gives them access to things that only the wealthy people had access to. Now, let's put this in real hard terms. There's, just out, there's a couple of surveys out, but when you look at Southeast Asia, which in particular has a large unbanked population, what you're seeing is that they're skipping over credit cards. Credit cards have been available in Southeast Asia for years. They're not new, but they were limited access. Poor people couldn't touch a Visa card or a MasterCard. They were only going through the banking system, through through the system that exists pretty much a copycat of the West, which means have a bank account, have money, apply for this. And then if you are deemed worthy, we'll give you the card. Well, in Southeast Asia, that only applies to maybe, what, 5% of the population, which means 95% can't possibly have access to these cards. But now, through digital wallets, they now have access to digital payments, digital loans in certain cases. But most importantly, what's happening is they're skipping over credit cards, so they could care less about Visa and MasterCard. So I'm passionate about it because it fundamentally makes lives better. And you can look, I think the best examples of this are still China. And China announced, I think it was about 2 years back, that they had eliminated the lowest level of poverty throughout the nation. And, that was in part, look, there were a lot of things that contributed to that, but it was in part due to digital payment and people in rural communities finally having access. So it's done wonders in India with the UPI system. It's doing wonders in Brazil with the Pix system. It's doing wonders in Indonesia, where Grab and Gojek and Goto now have introduced digital wallets. So each Southeast Asian nation, one after the other, is being transformed, and that's a fundamentally good thing. It makes me happy.
Yeah. No, I had a moment where I was thinking, it's one of those things we take for granted that, getting people banked is good, getting people financially included is good. Can I ask you the most basic question, which is, why is that such a good thing?
Yeah, it's a good. So let me help answer that question, and let me help put it this way. Let's look at an example where it's a bad thing, and we can give two hard examples. One in China, and it did involve Alipay and WeChat Pay. Both were doing microloans to people. And the other example is, of course, in India, where there's not a specific microloan company, but many microloan companies. So I'm not going to give, I don't have just one, all right? But in both India and China, when microloans started, they pushed them off to people in rural communities, and these people in rural communities were essentially taking out loans that they didn't understand. So these are real hardcore examples where digital payments have gone bad. The other example is Kenya, M-Pesa. For all the good that M-Pesa has done, there are digital loan platforms on M-Pesa, which are essentially digital loan sharking, that are horrible. They bankrupt people, and they're terrible. So that you have digital finance is good, that you are connected is good, that you can then be robbed legally. Because here's the problem. When we look at the WeChat and Alipay experiences, these were not, and I would say I don't want to focus only on them, but the Indian example as well. These were not five guys in an internet site. These were legally approved sites. They were not loan sharks in that they were underground. They were making money and profiting from giving loans to people who didn't really understand what the loans were, how they had to be paid back. So here's the physical question. When you connect rural populations to the financial system, what exactly are you giving them access to? And that's the scary part, where not only should you connect people, but you should connect people to safe platforms and safe use of digital. And that has to come with education, because certainly digital connectivity is a knife with two, or sword with two edges. It cuts both ways. It does good things, and clearly it can do some really bad stuff too. So it is like all technology. And we're seeing this with AI, ChatGPT. It does wonderful things that astounds us. And then it fundamentally lies to us and gives us the wrong information. So, all of these new technologies, we're in this constant battle between the good that they do and the bad that they do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was going to ask you actually, what do you see AI and machine learning? What do you see happening with it in the future, especially in the financial industry, in the banking industry?
Here's what I hope doesn't happen to it. And what we're seeing is that everybody in the planet, anywhere in and around a bank or a financial services institution, is basically trying to use it for customer service. And I make no qualms. I have 2 bank accounts down in Singapore, one with DBS, who's one of the best and most advanced users of chatbots, and I both love and hate their chatbot, because one time it fixed all my problems immediately, and I was absolutely astounded. I built chatbots for companies, and I said, "My God, this was astounding!" And the second time I used their chatbot to solve something out, I was so disgusted. I was like pushing that button that says, "Get me to a human being," So the answer is, it's clear that Gen AI has a role in customer service, but that is, of all of the uses, the least creative use. There's so much more that this technology can do for us. And it's also sort of funny because banks are already using AI to do credit card theft, anti-money laundering. Their AI is already hard at work in banks. It's not like Gen AI and creating a customer chatbot that may be smarter than the last version is the be-all and end-all of AI use for banks. So yeah, it's going to be great. We can see better, but please, God, please come up with something better than a ChatGPT based chatbot for customer service. Now, what I did see recently are it was a third-party banking app. The name escapes me. I'm going to plug them because I thought it was good. I'm sure the banks are working on it. And it was called Partheon. I had to look at Partheon, Parthean. And what it did was really, I wrote about it on LinkedIn. It was wonderful because what they did was they were able to take that chatbot interface and say, well, how much money is in my account? At my current rate of savings, when can I afford to go on vacation if the vacation costs X amount? And you can start to actually access your money verbally. And I'm sure Partheon is that maybe early on in this, other banks are obviously going to do this. And that transcends that use for customer service, because the new interface for your money will eventually be talking to it. Hey, how much money do I have? Well, that we've already got. That's kind of dopey, right? But what interest rate can I get through the bank if I use a different service? So, you can start chatting, and that's going to be really dramatic. And that's really, some bankers are going to say, well, we've already got that. I'd love to hear from you if that's the case. But, within the year, that's going to be rolled out at many of the digitally advanced banks. And ready? This is going to be the dividing line between the digital haves and the digital have-nots in banking. We looked at digital transformation through Gen AI as being, okay, well, that made the bank a little better than the other one, and my bank is not so digital, but we're still okay. We don't worry about digital so much. We're okay being in third or fourth place. We're good enough. Gen AI is going to make the gap between the digital greats and the digital not so greats so big that it's going to be truly disruptive for the industry. That's my prediction.
Yeah, no, the idea of being able to interact with a chat bot about your finances, I feel like would be such a game changer also for financial literacy, to really get a grip on what's happening in your bank account on this kind of deeper level that most people can't see through just the numbers.
Oh, absolutely. And that's the interface. Talk. Hey, how much do I have? Where am I going? I want to go here. How much can I spend? How much should I say? These are all, real and logical questions that you'll get a sound. Your bank, or I don't want to say bank. I want to say your digital wallet, whatever it is that is helping you with your money, can actually become your coach and or your financial advisor. And I think that's really important. And I think that's going to help a lot of people who are financially excluded and don't understand the full ramifications of a loan or these other things. They're going to be able to ask. They're not literate. They're not going to go read for 20 minutes about a subject, but they will willingly listen if somebody has the advice for them and gives it to them in a way that's digestible for them. Sure, it's a revolution coming. And that's good, right? These are all, so what around all these topics that we talked about today is a fundamental belief that these technologies can make our world a better place. And I fundamentally believe that. And I understand people who say, well, we have privacy issues, we have digital ID issues, we have fear of government. There's lots of reasons and problems to be worked out. I'm the first to admit all of that. But at the same time, we fundamentally have to look at this better future that digital can deliver to many people, and have to keep that in mind while we work diligently to sort out some of the underlying problems.
Yeah, absolutely. It's they're tools, and it's really about how we use them. So even just talking to you right now, you have a very clear and accessible way of communicating ideas. And I feel like that ties into your MBA teaching and everything. And I think it ties into being an influencer too, right? Like, it's all about sharing ideas in an accessible way and getting people to engage with it. So how has that sort of desire to share knowledge influenced your career path? I mean, it's also, you're writing books, it's all about that knowledge sharing for me, the way I see it.
I don't know. The only thing I can give you is like something that my mother told me, and she's like, "You don't want to lose an argument. You always want to be the smartest guy in the room." So it all goes back to when I was a kid. I didn't like losing arguments. Clearly, look, if this is for others who are perhaps interested in social media. What it does is it forces you to explain yourself very clearly. And I can give you a great example. So I reply to everybody who writes me on LinkedIn or Twitter, I reply to. But what is really wonderful is I have people who write to me, and I'll say, well, I disagree. I'm always super polite. And I say, I disagree. And then the response back is, well, I didn't really mean that. What I meant was this. Life is short. None of us have the ability to keep on taking back. I didn't really mean that. What I meant was that. And what you will gain if you do start writing in social media or participating is you will gain clarity of thought. I write basically 100 responses per day. If I am not laser sharp and clear in my intent, I'm doomed. And that goes down to my ability to give podcast interviews, to teach people, and you become a wordsmith or you become a better commander of language. So anybody I would read, so anybody who's interested in social media or at least wants to try it out, there is a tool that it will help. This will be a tool for you to get better at communicating. And but I have to say that it goes back to my mom. You don't want to lose an argument. I'm like, no, I can't stand losing an argument. And she was right. I was a kid, but I'm still that way, and I'm significantly older now.
And it's worked for you. So I have one last.
It's worked. It's worked that it's made me effective. Communicating clearly will make anybody who's listening to this communicate more effective at whatever it is that you want to do. And for corporate people, it's very important, except in those cases where you intentionally want to not be clear and obfuscate an answer because you don't want them to know what you're thinking. But that's another issue.
I just have one last question for you, which I would be remiss if I didn't ask you, which is, we talked about your kind of diverse background, your 4 career paths. What would be your advice for young innovators, people who want to, enter the financial services industry and innovate and change the industry?
Yeah. So I'll sort of pick this up. This is real for me because my nephew recently went for his MBA, and I told him everything that you do has to have a digital component somehow built into it. Everything that you learn. It doesn't. I'm not now. That's a very curious answer because I'm not telling you to go be a computer programmer. I'm not telling you if you're that you have to go learn to code. I'm just telling you that whatever it is that you're learning, and I would go as far as to say music or something absolutely unrelated, understand the digital component that's part of it. Okay. So clearly, if you wanted to go to work for a financial services industry right now and you're a young person, my nephew was more of a consulting guy, but you have to understand the digital systems. And if you are truly young and you are not in command of them, you're at a severe disadvantage because that's just where financial services are going. Financial services look to the model. Look to WeChat and Alipay. Think about them both having 1.2, 1.4 billion clients for their payment systems, and think about them running these payment systems with teams that are, a couple of, I don't know their exact size for WeChat Pay, but you're looking at thousands of employees, not tens of thousands. It's not a banking network. So your new paradigm for financial services is to have a small team managing a large number of accounts all through digital, as opposed to I have 100,000 employees in my bank and they're all spread across 10 in that branch, 20 in that branch, and they reach a small number of people. So that's the change in paradigm, and you have to be part of that. And the only way that you can contribute is by having this digital knowledge of some form. And that could be digital marketing, digital X, digital Y. It doesn't mean, I'm not telling you to go code, okay? So, but be digital and understand. That's my advice to everybody who's younger. And that's what I told my MBA students. I pushed them to do digital stuff. I taught them math and I taught them fintechy sort of stuff. So it was a natural. But for my nephew, I gave him that advice. And for any young person, be digital in some way or form.
I think that's true for almost every industry now. I mean, you have to be thinking about that technological angle. Thank you so much, Richard. This was really insightful. I learned a lot about CBDCs and especially about career paths changing and digital transformation. I really enjoyed this. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been wonderful being here. And a shout out to all of my friends at Machine Lab. And if you've gotten this far in the interview, thank you for listening. I would be remiss. Ready? If you agree or disagree with anything that I've said on this podcast, reach out to me on LinkedIn, reach out to me on Twitter. I have a website, richturrin.com, very simple, right? My name, richturrin.com. You can write me an email through that. But if you feel something, if you disagree, if you're mad at me, when I get them, please go ahead. Well, I'll gladly talk to you. I, as a matter of fact, have a wonderful book about going cashless, and it talks about a lot of these subjects. I can't not talk about that. And thank you so much for having me. And I'm just honored, and I would love to do more with you because I enjoyed every question that you asked.
I'm so glad.